Good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Burns, and I'm an application engineer with TriStar, and we are here today to discuss Mathcad Prime 7 and some of the key enhancements, what's new. And for those of you who are not familiar with TriStar, we are a company that specializes in helping manufacturing companies adopt software systems and processes to enable better and more efficient product development. We are the largest reseller for PTC products in North America, headquartered in Phoenix with our team spread across the US, Canada, and Mexico. In our agenda today, I thought I'd go through the PTC Mathcad product timeline briefly, high-level overview of where PTC has come. I'm going to focus on what's new in Prime 7.0. Okay, but for those of you who are interested, if you go to TriStar's website, we do have. So this is just tristar.com. There's a lot of information in here, but under the resources tab, we have webinar replays. This one will be included in the Mathcad group. Okay, so tomorrow you'll probably view today's recording in here, but if you're interested in some of the previous recordings, some of the previous webinars we have, a PTC Mathcad 101 demo, that translate across all versions, how to input math. I do a little bit with units awareness and documentation and integration with Excel. So we've got, some other webinars in here if you're interested, along with webinars and a whole bunch of other topics, CAD, Windchill. Okay, so if you're interested, come check it out. It's great. I'm going to be focusing on specifically what's new in Prime 7. And then I also want to start getting the message out there about Mathcad end of sale and using Mathcad Prime. Right, so a brief timeline. Mathcad Prime started about 10 years ago, 2011. This is when PTC overhauled Mathcad and came out with Mathcad Prime 1. A lot of people stayed on Mathcad 14 or 15 at this point. This is where they did the initial overhaul of the ribbon interface. Okay, and then Mathcad Prime 2 through 3.1 really filled in some of those major gaps. And then starting with Mathcad Prime 4 on, they started releasing the versions yearly around the same time. And then they shifted Prime 7 to align with the end of year. So it was yearly, mainly to align with subscription periods. But then they shifted Prime 7 and future releases. They should be aligning more with PTC's end of quarter, their annual year. Okay. As I mentioned before, Mathcad Prime 1, that's where they really overhauled the interface. They gave us the ribbon interface, the what you see is what you get user interface. They brought in the equation control editor, comprehensive support for units, and pretty much 2D plots. Prime 2 brought in symbolic calculations and 3D plots and Excel components. And what PTC was doing is they were listening to the feedback of the customers. What was the most requested items? They prioritized for the next release. Okay, so Prime 3.0 brought in math styles and templates and math and text. Okay, the ability to bring back the global definition. Okay, they brought all that back in. And then 3.1 is where they brought in the API functionality, because that is what the engineering notebook is using. Okay, the engineering notebook is, for those Creo users who are on the call, it's the integration of Mathcad with Creo. Okay, so it's a pretty neat little tool that you have starting with Mathcad Prime 3.1. Mathcad Prime 4 brought in areas, not necessarily areas, but the ability to protect and lock an area, better interoperability with third-party applications, not just Excel, but other applications like Word, for example. Equation wrapping, and it also brought in Windows 10 support. That was kind of a big deal at that point in time. Mathcad Prime 5 really worked on the plot enhancements. It brought in that chart component. So we have the ability to add the labels and the legends and many markers if needed to in the Prime 5.0. I demoed that in Prime 6 on our website if you wanted to see the chart component. That's one of the webinars that we have on our website. So that's a pretty nice little addition that they have. Prime 6.0, they brought in custom margins, headers and footers, spell check, which is one of, it's such a small thing, but one of my favorites. I'm the worst speller ever, in spell check I heavily rely on. We have the ability to bring in hyperlinks and text, and they introduced a new symbolic engine, which is a very big deal, and I'll be talking about that in this presentation. So what does Prime 7.0 bring us? Prime 7.0, it brought us the ability to have that combo box input control. Some of you guys who have used the radial buttons or any kind of input controls in Mathcad 15 is now inside of Mathcad Prime 7. There's a standalone converter inside of Mathcad Prime. There's some symbolic enhancements, some general UI enhancements. There is now an API guide and then just some general bug fixes. So let's spend the next couple of minutes going through each one of these. The combo box input control is really part of the equation control, which is very important. In previous versions, they were not part of, they were a separate region. Okay, so you have the ability to define variables, and they're associated with a number of identifiers. And you can put this in a drop-down menu, and when you specify the drop-down menu, it'll propagate those values in the worksheet. Okay, so I thought I would come in here and maybe go through a quick example of creating one of those combo boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and I did have to go through a tutorial because I wasn't able to just add those rows very easily. So I thought maybe showing you guys live, that might help you guys a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define an input matrix. Okay, so for those of you guys who are still in Mathcad 15, the matrix engine is pretty nice. And we're going to define Young and Shear. Let's move him over. And let's define this to be an input control box. So we have a combo box icon under input output right here. Okay, it's almost like defining our variables. But if you want to add rows and columns, what you do is you add them as if you were adding a table, adding a row or a column to a table or matrix. Okay, so I can say insert below a couple of times. I can insert to the right. And what we're going to do is we're just going to fill in some information here. Okay, and bring in our units. Okay, so one column is representing Young's modulus, and the other one is representing the shear. That's it. You can click away, and you'll see you have your drop-down box with our different inputs. here. And what we can do is we can evaluate those different variables. Okay, let's change the unit. Okay, so it's giving us the value for platinum. Okay. If we change this value in the pull down menu to gold, you can see how these values change. We change the value to aluminum, we could see how the values change. And the correct values, because they were defined in this control box, will be propagated in the different equations that we have. Okay. If you needed to edit this, you could always right-click the control box and hit edit, and you would be able to edit those values or add rows or add columns as needed. All right, let's go into slideshow mode. For those of you guys who will be migrating your data from Mathcad 15 to Prime 7, it does support the conversion to the new combo box from radial button and checkbox web controls, if you had those in your worksheets from Mathcad 15. Okay. There's a standalone converter. With Mathcad Prime 7, you don't have to install legacy versions, Mathcad 15, on the same computer, which was a requirement for Mathcad Prime 6 and previous versions. That seemed really confusing for a lot of the customers out there. They didn't understand why they had to install both versions on the same computer. It was just one of the requirements that were needed when you run through the converter. You see, Mathcad Prime 7 is not just going to open up a Mathcad 15 file. You have to convert it, and this is now included in Prime 7. It doesn't use a separate license. There's no funky workaround that we had to use before if you only wanted to use one license. So this is pretty nice. It is part of the installation of Prime 7. There's an option to select to install this converter. So if you don't have it, you might need to run through the installation again because it's part of the installation. You can opt in to install this during the installer or not. Okay, we talked about the Symbolic engine for a hot second earlier, but they introduced the Symbolic engine in Mathcad Prime 6. So in Mathcad Prime 6, you could choose to use either the new Symbolic engine, which was the default behavior. If you didn't like the way some of the results were coming in, you did have the ability to revert back to what I'll call classic mode, using the more legacy Symbolic engine. PTC didn't have control of the previous Symbolic engine. There was a third party out there that PTC was using for their Symbolic engine. So if there was anything that was wrong, PTC did not have the ability to go in and manipulate a lot of that code. So they spent a lot of time creating an engine, their Symbolic engine. And they spent a lot of time working on this, and they took a lot of the feedback from Prime 6 customers and enhanced it for Prime 7. In Prime 7, they fully embraced the new Symbolic engine. There is no old Symbolic engine. Everything is going to be in Prime 7. But at the same time, PTC has more control with interacting with the code and the algorithms and getting it to work the way the customers want it to work. Okay. Now, because they have full control of this new Symbolic engine in Prime 7, there's some enhanced functionality and some performance improvements. So as far as enhanced functionality, they worked on the calculation side where you've got definite and indefinite integrals. You can provide limits. They've worked on polynomials, powers, and roots of equations. They've worked on the keyword solve for enhancements, to expand the problem set for solve and solve with fully. Okay, so if you need to work on systems with equalities and inequalities or equations with symbolic functions. They worked on the series keyword to expand the support of binomial series, and the assume keyword as well if working with complex values. And then some performance calculations, again with integrals, definite and indefinite limits, and then large powers and polynomials. And then they worked on the improvements of the keyword solve, simplify, and float, because they have that capability now with the new symbolic engine to work on some of these specific areas. There are some UI enhancements. Some of these are, you might notice a little bit more than others. For example, we have a save to PDF now in the file menu. You can just do a save as, and there's a new save to PDF. They changed some of their PDF drivers to allow for that. They worked on the zoom, focus, and scroll. Down here in the lower right-hand corner, there's a zoom bar, and some of you may have noticed if you had large equations or symbolic calculations or just a lot of data, sometimes the refactoring of the zoom in and zoom out just was not that great. And so they really spent a lot of time on working with that, because some of you guys need to work on specific portions of these worksheets, and the zoom is a very powerful way to do that. And so having it to work a little bit more like you would expect it to work, they've worked on that. And then you have the ability to show and hide major grid lines. You know, something pretty minor. Let's come in here. If you go to the document, you can show major grid lines. I don't know if you guys are able to see that or not. Even if you go through the fine grid size, okay, we can show major grid lines or not. Okay, something minor, but nice, could be very useful. And then in the file menu, if you wanted to do a save as, you have the PDF, save to PDF. Okay. Okay. Keeps taking me into this view. Okay, and there's the API guide. So the API was introduced in Prime 3.1. That's what was needed to power the engineering notebook. But they didn't do the best job of documenting it or having a good section in the help section with examples to help you utilize it inside of Mathcad. And so if you go into the help section, let's see if we can find it. Okay, if we go into help, which opened up in a web page, let's see, integrating with other products, and then the API guide is right there. Okay, so they've got a lot of information in here, and if you're not using the API stuff, then you know you don't really care about this, but there's a lot of information in here, including some examples if needed. And if this is something you're interested in, they now have a lot of things documented, and more versions, they're going to just enhance this documentation. Okay, so that is new in Prime 7.0. Let's start talking about Mathcad end of sale. PTC is ending the sale of Mathcad 15 and Mathcad Prime 1 through 6 at the end of the calendar year 2021. Okay. So effective December 31st, 2021, PTC will end the sale of the following Mathcad versions: Mathcad 15 and Mathcad Prime 1 through 6. No new license sales for Mathcad 15. There's going to be no new license sales, and there's no subscription license renewals either for Mathcad Prime 15 or Mathcad Prime 1 through 6. Starting January 1st, 2022, the only version of Mathcad available for sale, subscription renewal, and software distribution will be Mathcad Prime 7. Okay. If you renew your subscriptions, Mathcad Prime 7 is going to be the version that works. It happens during the license refresh. So if you don't refresh your license until, let's say, February, then you have all of January to still use the previous versions. Okay, it's not just going to magically stop working. It comes down to the license file. PTC understands that not everyone's ready to make that jump to Prime 7 yet, and so they are offering a multi-year option for subscription renewals for those who must or prefer to continue using Mathcad 15 or Mathcad Prime 1 through 6. It's good for up to 4 years. This has to be, the contract must be completed before the end of the year, so before December 31st. And they recommend maybe you put in the order before December 7th. Due to the holidays, it's the end of Q3, so it would avoid delays or other issues in booking the order. Okay. And what you can use this extra time provided by the multi-year option to assess future versions of Mathcad and plan to migrate your team to Mathcad Prime before the next renewal cycle. So you can either use this year to assess Mathcad Prime 7 and say, yes, we're jumping on board, or if we plan to stay behind, you might need the multi-year option. So I wanted to mention this because I feel like I just need to start getting this message out that this is happening. Okay. Well, what's the advantage of Mathcad Prime? A lot of users are still inside of Mathcad 15, okay? Don't be scared to make that jump into Mathcad Prime. It's been out for 10 years now. They've added a lot of functionality inside of Mathcad Prime, maybe even some more functionality that's not inside of Mathcad 15. It is a different interface, and I understand that, you know, change sucks. I get it. It is a different interface, but we just have to do it. We just have to make that move. And so Prime is more intuitive and easier to use. There's an increased focus on engineering documents. There's improved interoperability with other applications, and there's expanded and enhanced math engine for functionality. And Mathcad Prime is what they're doing R&D with. Okay, they're working on Mathcad Prime in development product. They're not working on Mathcad 15, and they're not putting any support into Mathcad 15 at all. So when we talk about ease of use, it's got that ribbon interface that everybody else has gone to, based on, you know, Microsoft kind of led the charge on that one. What you see is what you get, the WYSIWYG document editing. It's just so intuitive to create some of these documents, and there's some really nice document elements that they've brought in. You have a text block and a text box, okay, as described in the Mathcad 101 webinar that we have on TriStar's website. There's an improved equation editor in here, just to create those really long formulas, right? The space bar and insert. It's just a lot more improved to insert those really large and complex formulas that you might have to bring in there. And the zoom is more accessible with the sliding scale down in that lower right-hand corner. When we talk about the documentation piece, I really feel like that's Mathcad's strength. You know, if you're creating a document for work or for school, you just can create these professional, aesthetically pleasing documents. Um, you don't have to export the math into another program, although you could. You don't have to in order to create some of these really nice documents that you're trying to create. And so I mentioned the text block. That's a nice new feature in Prime that we don't have in Mathcad 15. There's different math type labels if you needed to emphasize one math region over another math region. If you wanted to highlight different areas, you could definitely do that. You do have the ability to turn on a worksheet grid, or you can hide the worksheet grid. You don't need to place it, but sometimes it makes it a lot easier to help align your math and your different regions. Some really nice header and footer functionality and features that they've included to standardize the look and feel of the document. The integration and interoperability is really nice. You know, there was integration with Excel in Mathcad 15, but they've really streamlined it in Mathcad Prime. It's really easier to integrate and to use the Excel component to embed Excel data into your worksheets. There's a new Creo Mathcad integration with the engineering notebook that you can only do in Prime. You cannot use Mathcad 15.4. And what it does is it almost embeds the notebook within Creo, so you can use the engineering math to help drive your CAD designs. Okay, and we have the API enhancements that are included along with the guide in Prime 7. So there's enhanced and expanded math functionality. I mean, there is just a lot of stuff here inside of Prime, starting with units. There's mixed units and matrices, tables, plots. There's dynamic unit checking. There's just a lot of algorithms that they spent working on the unit side. It supports 64-bit machines to work with significantly larger problems. There's a new programming construct and flow, a new solve block construct. There's a new chart component, new symbolic engine. The matrix manipulation is a lot different than it was in Mathcad 15. For those of you on the line who are doing discrete Fourier transforms, there is improved performance for those. So they really have been spending a lot of time to make Prime equivalent to Mathcad 15, if not better. Okay, so ease of use, engineering documentation, integration, interoperability, enhanced and expanded math functionality. There's a lot of reasons why you might want to make that jump. I suggest you try it because of that end of sale situation at the end of the year. Mathcad 7 is the only thing you'll be able to purchase next year. There is a handout in the handout drawer on this webinar that shows us the Mathcad Prime 7.0 data sheet. So please go ahead and download and take a look at that. There is a time limited offer, a TLO, we call them, that seems to be good through the end of this month, where buy one, get one half off for 1 year and multi-year subscriptions. So that might be worth looking into. Please feel free to reach out to us or your account manager at TriStar if this is something you're interested in. Okay. Don't forget, you've got our website. If you go to resources, webinar replays, you'll see this webinar included. If not today, then probably tomorrow. And there's previous webinars in there as well. So that is all I have. And so let me open up this question box, see if we've gotten anything coming through the wires here. Okay, I don't see anything. This was a pretty quick presentation. Wanted to show you guys what was new in 7, and I wanted to bring up the end of sale of Mathcad 15 and Prime 1 through 6. The main reason is for that Symbolic engine. PTC's third-party Symbolic engine provider, their contract ends at the end of the year, and so they cannot legally sell the product after this year, which is why they're having that end of sale. Okay, so there's no questions. Okay, let me see. I think I see one coming in. Are we able to back save to a previous version when working with a vendor or customer who has not upgraded to Prime 7? Unfortunately not. If you wanted to, it's version compatible or upward. So if someone is on Prime 3, you would be able to open up in Prime 7. But as soon as you hit save in Prime 7, it's a Prime 7 file, and they will not be able to open it up. If it's just for information, we can always PDF it, right? Or export it into the neutral file format, but it is not downward compatible. Good question. Okay, I do not have a subscription, but a purchased license. Does this change anything? If you have a perpetual license, you should be good. As long as you're not updating license files, but it's a permanent license of Mathcad 15, you should be fine. How much symbolic or embedded data is lost when converting a Mathcad 15 file to Prime? You should try running a test conversion. You shouldn't lose any data. It should translate just fine. What you might need to play with, though, is the Symbolic engine. You might want to try migrating it to Prime 6 so you can see what the new Symbolic engine gives you and what the legacy Symbolic engine gives you. But know that in Prime 7, we only have the new one. So this is that time where we need to get PTC, if there are any issues, we need to get them involved because it's almost a fire drill at this point. Does the multi-year renewal include both 15 and Prime? I believe so, yes. It's specifically for 15 and before Prime 7, but I believe it does. I might need to get back to you on that one, Charles. I don't see why it wouldn't, is what I'm trying to say. But I know that Mathcad Prime, let's say 6, and Mathcad Prime 7 are 2 separate line items on your license file. Okay, great. I think we're getting most of the questions through, and I appreciate you guys joining us today, and we'll see you next time.